Hello everyone, welcome back to the Stitches in STEM YouTube channel. My name is Michaela and this is podcast episode number 18. It's only been a week since I last recorded. I usually record every 2 or 3 weeks, but I have a few things that I want to share today. In the last 1 or 2 months, I've gained a lot of new subscribers and I figured it's been a while since I introduced myself, so I'm just going to do that again. As I said, my name is Michaela and I live in Dublin, Ireland. I've lived here my entire life. I've been knitting for just over 2 years. I started in August 2022. And I was crocheting for 2 years before that. I started that during the pandemic. As much as I wish knitting was my full-time job, it is not. I'm actually a scientist and that's where the name of the channel comes from. So I've never really had anyone ask me about the name, but in the last video I got a couple of comments asking about the name. So in case you weren't aware, STEM, S-T-E-M, is an acronym for science, technology, engineering and maths. And in particular, the phrase women in STEM is used to denote women in any of those fields as a way to kind of encourage women to get involved in any of those fields. So since I am a scientist, I wanted to relate that into my channel name. So instead of women in STEM, it's Stitches in STEM. So I hope that clears up the name. I do have other hobbies, although admittedly I don't spend nearly as much time on them as I do on knitting. So I do play piano. And I also do pole fitness, and some people would call it pole dancing, but I like to say that I don't have the rhythm for dancing, and I definitely don't. I don't have any rhythm. I just do it for like the strength. I generally don't like to exercise, but that is one rare form of exercise that I do like, so that's why I do it. I have a dog, his name is Reggie, and he is a mix of every breed under the sun. You name a breed and he's got it in him. We got him from a rescue, and a few weeks after we adopted him, the rescue called us and told us that someone who had adopted his sibling, I guess, from the same litter, had a DNA test done, and it turned out he was equal parts Collie, Rottweiler, Staffy, Pit Bull, and 4% Terrier, and I think the 4% is in the beard. He's got a little terrier beard. He is a menace, but I love him all the same, and I'm a huge dog lover. If you want to see more of what I'm working on, you can find me on Instagram and on Ravelry with the same username. Both of those links are in the description box below. My Ravelry I tend to keep quite up to date. I will always input the yarns that I use, and I will always update the project at the end with the amount of yarn that I used. I try to remember to put in the size that I'm knitting. That's something I sometimes forget, but if you ever have any questions about that, you can just ask me. And I also try to update my Ravelry with all of my modifications that I made to any patterns and things like that. So for all of that, that's in the description box. One thing I haven't mentioned in a while, and this is more helpful for those based particularly in Ireland, but also in the EU, I have made this kind of yarn shop directory where I have listed all of the yarn shops that at least I could find in the EU that stock some of the more popular, mostly Scandinavian brands, but brands from other countries as well. So Knitting for Olive, Sanna's Garn, Isier, Filcolana, Gepard Garn, anything else that I can think of. And I basically took any of those shops that stock those yarns and also shipped to Ireland, and I put them in this yarn shop directory because a lot of those brands aren't easily available in Ireland, at least not in person. So we do have to order usually from Europe if we want to use any of those brands. So I decided to put together this list to make it handy to find the particular brand that you're looking for. So if you're looking for Sanna's Garn, Peer Gynt and Filcolana Tilia, you can filter the yarn shop directory to only show shops that stock both of those. So I hope that will be helpful to some of my Irish viewers. And if you're not based in Ireland but you are based in the EU, those shops will probably ship to your country as well. So go check that out. And if you would like to support the work that went into that yarn shop directory, you could support me on Ko-fi or Ko-fi, whatever it's called, which I've left a link to in the description box, or you could buy me a pattern from my Ravelry wishlist, which is also linked in the description box. And the very last thing, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to join us more often on the Stitches in STEM YouTube channel. So with all of that admin out of the way, I don't usually have that much admin at the start of the video, but I just felt like it's been a while since I said all of those important things. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into the video. We have one finished object, one updated finished object, and I also have a couple of whips, one of which I'm particularly excited to show. So let's just get into it. I am not wearing any knitwear, so we can skip a what I'm wearing section and just go straight to the first finished object, which is my summer camp socks. These have not been blocked. I just put them on blockers for presentation purposes. They obviously look a lot nicer on the blockers. This pattern is Summer Camp Socks by Jill Zielinski. It's a free pattern, and I've mentioned before that it is one of my favorite free patterns. I have made this before, so this is my second time making it, and it won't be my last. This yarn is from Homespun House, and it's a sock set called Keepsake. So the main colour is mostly purple, but it's variegated with hints of reds and browns in it. And the contrast colour is just a very plain greyish, which I think looks great with the main colour. In the last episode, I had one sock finished and I was working through the gusset on the second sock. Going back to basics, I cast on 60 stitches and I did a 1x1 rib cuff for 20 rounds. For the stripes, I did 7 rounds for the first stripe, then 5 rounds for the main colour in between, 7 rounds again for the next contrast colour stripe, and then I worked 41 more rounds, so I had 60 rounds total in the leg. And then I did a slip stitch, heel flap and gusset, and after the gusset decreases I worked 50 rounds on the foot before doing an anatomical toe. The anatomical toe basically means decreasing more on the outside of the sock so that it is more form-fitting to the natural shape of your foot, because feet obviously don't end in a point the way a kind of symmetrical toe does. I basically start my decreases on the outside without doing any decreases on the inside until I get about halfway through the toe, and then I start decreasing on the inside as well. And for full stitch counts for that, you can find it in my Ravelry project page for these socks. So as I mentioned, I have made these socks before. This is my second pair. The first pair actually turned out too big. Well, they worked up fine, but then when I blocked them, they grew a lot. But I noticed that that was happening at the time with a lot of the socks that I was knitting. And I was knitting my socks on magic loop. Ever since I've started knitting socks, I've pretty much done them on magic loop. And just after a while, I noticed that my tension started to loosen up, but it didn't really come across in the finished object until it was blocked. So it was almost like whatever way I was knitting was introducing extra yarn that wasn't showing up in the stitch until it blocked, and it just kind of all relaxed. And it was kind of frustrating me. So I switched to 9-inch circulars and my tension immediately tightened up. So I kind of figured that that was just, I don't know, just something to do with the way I was knitting on magic loop, which was corrected by using the 9-inch circulars. So I've been using 9-inch circulars since May, I think. That's when I switched to them, and I've just noticed a huge improvement in the fit of my socks. I also cast on fewer stitches with these. So the last ones I made, I cast on 64, and with these ones I cast on 60. So it's a 3x1 rib, so it just has to be divisible by 4, which of course 60 is. And these are really, really snug. As I said, I haven't blocked them yet. I don't think they're going to block out to be unwearable like my other ones are. But right now, they're actually quite a struggle to get onto my foot. But once they're on, they're really snug. And to be honest, I love that. That's the way I like my socks to fit. I like to feel like they're cutting off the circulation in my feet. And that's just what these do. So I'm really excited to block these and to actually wear them. As I mentioned in the last episode, you can see a slight difference in the colour. I actually think, let me see if I can show these so that the contrast colour isn't visible. I think it's not as noticeable when you hold them side by side. It's only when you compare it to the contrast with the contrast colour. So with this one, there's obviously a lot less contrast between the main colour and the contrast colour. Whereas with this one, there's a starker difference between the dark colour of the main colour and the very pale contrast colour. So I think it's more noticeable when you look at the contrast colour, but not so much when they're just held side by side. Interesting. It doesn't bother me at all, and I do think that with blocking and or with wear, this one will fade and they'll both be the same colour, but if they don't, it's not something that bothers me. So yeah, really happy with these. The next thing I want to show is actually an updated finish object, and that is my Celeste Sweater, which is a pattern by Petite Knit. It's a colourwork yoke jumper, and I knit mine in Sandnes Garn Peer Gynt. I can't remember what the colours are, there's far too many, but they are all in my Ravelry page, and I knit this on 3.5mm needles. Can't remember the size I made, but knowing me, it was probably the size small, which with this pattern was the third pattern. So I know some of Petite Knit's older patterns start at an extra small, so the third size is the medium, which is what I knit when I'm knitting those older patterns. But when I knit her newer patterns, I either do an extra small or a small. So with this one, I probably did a small, if I'm remembering correctly. This is actually my third time finishing this jumper. I originally finished it in January 2024, and it was one of the first garments I made, so I didn't really know what I liked in terms of the fit, in terms of the length and things like that. And coincidentally, this was way too long and the ribbing at the bottom was too tight. I actually did wear this jumper once. I brought it on a trip to Tallinn with me, and it annoyed me so much because I couldn't even sit down in it without manually having to hoosh the ribbing around so that I could sit down and stand up comfortably. Basically, the ribbing had so much negative ease that wherever it was sitting, that's where it stayed, and it just didn't move. It didn't like slide up and down as I sat down or stood up, which is not something I've ever thought about. And again, this kind of goes back to this being one of my first garments and not really having experience with garment knitting and knowing how to approach the fit and things like this. It wasn't something I thought about until I was wearing this, and every time I sat down I had to manually push the ribbing up out of the way so that I didn't sit on it because it was also so long. And then when I stood up, I had to manually pull the ribbing back down so that it sat not on my waist, like it sat down on my hips. So it just really annoyed me and I didn't wear it again. So I think it was in February then that I cut into it and I took away 2 inches from the body and I grafted it back together. Sorry, I just realised my lights weren't on and it was getting quite dark, so I've just turned them on. So the last time I talked about this, I was basically saying how shocked I was that I was willing to cut and graft the jumper instead of undoing the tubular bind off. And I realised from the comments and from watching other podcasters that a lot of people don't mind cutting and grafting a jumper back together, and I don't either. I think I gave the wrong impression in that episode. I do that as well when it's just the length that needs to be fixed. So if something needs to be shortened or lengthened, depending on my mood, I will either undo the whole bind off and, you know, whatever needs to be unknit and reknit, or I will cut and add length or take length and graft back together. It depends on how I feel. The issue with this was that it wasn't just the length, it was also the ribbing that needed to be redone, but I convinced myself that I didn't need to redo the ribbing just so I wouldn't have to undo the tubular bind off. And that's why I'm just flabbergasted at my past self, because I cut corners, convinced myself that I would wear it if it was just a bit shorter, and spoiler, I have not worn it once. It's funny because I looked back at my Ravelry project for this page and the last update that I had added, I think I have wool in my mouth. The last update that I had added was after doing that cutting and grafting, and I wrote something like, I'm so much happier with this now. I'm definitely going to wear this all the time. So this sat collecting dust all year until just before Christmas, and I realised now is the time to fix this, because I had these big blocks of time over the Christmas holidays where I could do something as tedious as undoing a bind off, undoing ribbing, redoing it all on the cuffs and the body. So that's what I did. Another thing that I was completely blind to when I first knit this was the sleeve length. So it's too short, or it was too short. And again, it's just not something that occurred to me at the time. Like, if a garment didn't fit me well at the time, I wasn't very good at trying to tease out what it was about the garment that I didn't like. As I said, the main issue that I saw with this was the length, and I kind of knew the ribbing was an issue too, but I just was in denial. And I didn't really think about the fact that the sleeves were too short. So they were about, I'll show some B-roll footage from previously, but they were basically to about here. And I like my jumper sleeves come down to about here. Actually, they were more like bracelet length, I guess, especially when I start to move my arms around. So the short sleeves coupled with the really tight cuff, it was awful. I didn't like the fit at all. If this happened now and I knit something that I thought looked funny on me, what I would do is go through each aspect of it and try and isolate that aspect and figure out what it is that I don't like about it. Like, I would first look at the collar and say, is it too short? Is it too tight? Is it too loose? Is it too floppy? Like, what is it about the collar that I don't like? And, you know, maybe it's not the collar. Okay, next, move on. Is it the armpit? Is it too deep? Is it too short? That kind of thing. I know to do that now. Whereas when I made this jumper, I tried it on and I stood in front of the mirror for ages being like, I just don't like it. And I think it's too long. And obviously I was right about that, but I completely ignored the sleeves. And that's something that stood out to me as clear as day when I tried this on in November to see what I needed to fix about it. The first thing I thought was, well, the sleeves are too short. It's just obvious to me now. So yeah, it's really interesting how your perspective changes. So over Christmas, I ripped out the cuffs. I added a whole 2.5 inches, which is pretty significant. And I also re-knit the cuff on 3.5mm needle, which is also what I had knit the rest of the jumper on. So originally I had knit it on 3mm needle, but obviously that gave that really tight cinched effect. So I knit it on 3.5. And you can see it's pretty much very similar circumference. There is still a minor, it is still a tiny bit narrower than the stockinette portion of the sleeve, but it's not like, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's cinching in. I also undid the hem ribbing and I also re-knit that on 3.5mm needles. I had enough yarn left in one of the balls to do the first sleeve, but I realised I wasn't going to have enough yarn to do the hem and the cuff from a fresh ball, so I had to reuse the yarn, which is fine. I would prefer to do that anyway, but because it's been knit up for nearly a year, I had to soak it. So that was the first for me. I've never done that before or even thought about how to do that before, but I just did what I assumed was correct and I wound it around my forearm while I was undoing it from the jumper. And I put little ties in it and then I soaked it and I hung it up to dry. And at that point I realised it obviously wasn't going to fit around my Swift if I had just wound it around my forearm. So I had to put it around a bowl and I just wound it back into a cake from that. But it was fine. It was still a bit wavy, but it wasn't kinky enough. Still a bit wavy, but not so much that it would affect my tension. So I was still able to use it. So it is done, and for the first time with this jumper, I will be completely honest with you and with myself. I still don't love it. I think the ribbing is still cinching in a bit, which you can definitely see on the body. But my happiness with this has gone from like a 2 to a 7.5. So I think that's a huge improvement, and I will actually wear it this time. I'm not lying about that. I'm definitely being honest this time. I will actually wear it. Any other time that I knit ribbing on the same size needle as I knit the stockinette, I never get that cinching effect. So I think it's something to do with this yarn, that it's like super elastic or something. It's Sandnes Pure Gint. Even the stockinette portion, like there is so much memory in this. It's so stretchy and so elastic. So I do think it's to do with the yarn, and it doesn't bother me as much as it used to, of course. I also think the ribbing will probably relax out with blocking. So I am going to block this so that I can even out the areas where I joined in the yarn and started re-knitting sections. You can see how much length I added there, and it is pretty significant, like nothing to be sniffed at. With the body, I didn't add any length, but I do think it looks a bit bumpy around where I started re-knitting the ribbing. So yeah, I just think blocking will help that, and I think it will stretch out a little bit and relax a bit with ribbing or with blocking. The other thing is that I had originally done my tubular bind off too tight, so even if I wanted to like stretch it out, I couldn't. It just wouldn't stretch, whereas this is a lot stretchier, so it will just feel more comfortable. In the original jumper, I could actually feel the bind off edge when I was wearing it. I could feel the bind off edge around my hips. It was that tight. So this is a lot stretchier, and yeah, I definitely am going to wear this from now on. Another interesting thing is, having worked with a bunch of different yarns since making this, I now know enough about other yarns, what I like, what I don't like about them, to be able to compare the Pure Gint, and I can safely say that I really like this yarn and I want to make something with it again, hopefully in 2025 if I get a chance. Again, when I was making this, it just didn't occur to me to think about the yarn and to try and tease out what I liked and what I didn't like. And I don't think there's anything I don't like about it. It is a little bit scratchy. When I wear this, if I wear this next to skin, I can feel the individual hairs kind of against my skin. I'm not sensitive to wool, so it doesn't particularly bother me, and it doesn't make me want to itch or scratch. It's just that I can feel it against my skin. I definitely can understand why some people are a little bit sensitive to this. I'm personally not, and I'm looking forward to working with it again. Another thing I want to mention is that I have to give credit to Ode from Baubles and Berries, because I would not have picked this up to fix it if I hadn't seen her wearing her version in a podcast episode a few months ago. Can't remember off the top of my head what colours it was, but I think it had blues in it and like a neutral colours. I think it was like, whereas the colour aspect of mine is obviously like pinks and burgundies, the colour aspect of hers is blue, and it's just beautiful. And I was watching it and I was like, oh, it looks so good, I need to fix mine. So thank you, Ode. I would not have picked up and fixed mine if it weren't for your beautiful Celeste sweater. So we'll move on to whips. I am actually only going to talk about 2 of my whips today. I have 3 active whips, and I also have 2 projects that I need to fix. So they're also kind of whips. And yeah, I am slowly whittling down the number of whips. I think I had like 7 over Christmas, and that's too much for me. 3 is my happy number. So at the moment, with the 3 active ones that I have, and then 2 that are finished objects that need to be fixed, which I'm counting as whips, I do have a lot going on. But we're getting there. One by one I'm taking them off, and I do really want to cast something else on, but I'm not allowing myself to cast anything on until at least after I get back from Disneyland. I'm going to Disneyland Paris for my 30th birthday, which I'm so excited for. Probably will cast something on the day I get back, just because I'm really itching to cast something on. So that's kind of my promise to myself. If I bring a whip to Disneyland and I make good progress on it, I can cast something on when I get home then. But anyway, the first whip that I want to show is actually related to Disneyland, because I want to bring it with me because it's going to be cold. So I decided to make myself a pair of mittens out of this beautiful merino mohair yarn. It's from El Robledal de la Santa, and I got it at Barcelona Knits. The base is called Mohairino Fino, and the colour is Sakura. It's 50% merino and 50% mohair. You can see it has just a gorgeous, gorgeous fuzz. And when I bought this, I kind of knew that I wanted to make mittens, or at least decided very shortly after buying it. Like, it wasn't one of those things that I bought and I was like, I don't know what to make with this. I was like, for some reason I just had it in my head, I want to make mittens. And I've never made mittens before, so that was a first for me. So I'll just show what I have so far. And I am so pleased with this. Let me put it on for you. Oh, I love it. I'm so happy with it. Okay, I'm going to leave this on. I wanted to make the Field Mittens by Camilla Vad. I just really loved the leaf motif on those and I thought it would go beautifully with this fluffy pink yarn. However, those mittens are written for DK weight yarn, I think. They're also fingerless and they also have a different cuff style. So I wanted this like 2x2 folded over cuff. And I also read pretty bad reviews of the pattern on Ravelry. So for all of those reasons, I didn't buy the pattern and instead I bought another pattern that has the same motif, and that is the Grow Socks by Fiber Tales. So it also has this leaf motif at the cuff of the sock. And I figured that I would just use the chart and I would sub it into a fingering weight mitten pattern. So this is very much a hybrid pattern inspired by one using a motif from another and using a base pattern for another part of it. So, and I would say that those three patterns together contribute to 80% of the mitten, and then the other 20% is from my own brain, where I'm making my own changes in a way that gives me a mitten that, you know, matches the vision that I have in my head. So I cast on 60 stitches for the cuff and I worked the initial part in stockinette, which you can see there, and then I flipped to 2x2 ribs so that I could have a folded cuff without having all of this bulk of a 2x2 rib on the inside. And I'm really glad I did that because it feels really nice and comfortable against my wrist. And then I started knitting this leaf motif straight away. The free mitten pattern that I was using said to knit 5 rounds plain and then start the increases for the thumb gusset. I actually did 9 rounds and then started the increases, and I realised, again, it's my first time making mittens, I just wasn't too familiar with construction. I realised that the placement of the thumb gusset would be linked to this leaf motif. Like, I needed to think about where the thumb gusset was going to go so that it, you know, didn't break up the motif, obviously. And it made sense for me to put it in between two. Okay, I'll just take the mitten off. My hand's nice and warm though. It made sense for me to put it in between two of these stems. So we've got a stem here and a stem here, and then the gusset going up in the middle. At this point, I also realised that the pattern had 61 stitches in the round, whereas I had 60 stitches. So I fudged in an increase, which you can kind of see at the very, very bottom, somewhere here. I can't tell if I'm pointing to it, but there's like a make one left there. So I fudged that in. I think it looks fine. And then I had a bit of a brain fart. To this day, I have no idea what I was thinking. I somehow convinced myself that I would need, so let me move closer so that I can show this comfortably. So I basically have 10 stitch repeats here. I've got this motif and then there's a stem, and that's all one repeat. So from here to here is one 10 stitch repeat, and I'll fold it over so you can see. So I have a stem here going up the side of the thumb gusset, and for some reason I incorrectly realised that I would also need a stem going up this side of the thumb gusset, and it's not there now, but we'll get to that. So at this point I was about here and I realised, wait a second, I'm going to need a stem. I think I was thinking that I would have extra space up here and that I would need, and that I would need to put like a leaf motif here, because otherwise I was going to have a leaf motif here and then not another leaf motif until here. And I figured, oh wait, I'm going to need one here, so I better start a stem so that I can have a leaf motif up here. It probably doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why I thought that, but anyway. These stems are made by alternating knitting through the back loop and slipping stitches. So when I was just about to start the thumb gusset, I'm actually embarrassed to admit this, I laddered down and I twisted and slipped these stitches accordingly so that I would have a stem. Very, very silly, I know. I also realised that each of the other stems have one plain knit column on either side, and the stem that I had just created, it needed a plain knit column between it and between the start of this leaf motif here. So I fudged in another increase and I worked up a plain knit column to where my needle was at that point. It was all at the bottom of the mitten, so I wasn't worried about how it looked or how it felt, and a good knitter would have frogged back and obviously re-knit the whole thing. And I have done, I have done that a lot in the past when it comes to fixing things and wanting to make things perfect. I have, like, I'm not allergic to frogging. Most of the time when I need to frog, I will frog. But I just didn't with these. I just didn't want to. So part of the reason was that at that point I was still getting used to the leaf motif and I was actually struggling a lot with the cabling portion of it, which I'll talk about later. but that was why I didn't frog basically. So I continued working the increases for the thumb gusset, which you can see probably more easily on this side. There's a few increases here. At some point I realised the pattern was increasing every third stitch, whereas I was increasing every second stitch. I was halfway through the increases at this point, so I decided to switch to increasing every fourth stitch, so that by the time I was finished the increases, I would have worked the same number of rows as in the pattern and I would have the same number of increases. I was trying the mitten on a lot as I went, and I realised that the thumb gusset was going to be too short, or else that the mitten would have to sit higher up on my hand if I were to split for the thumb and the palm where the pattern was instructing me to split. So I made the decision to finish the increases as according to the pattern and just keep knitting straight with no increases in the thumb gusset. And I'm actually so glad that I did that because it fits really, really well. At that point, I realised that I no longer needed that extra stem that I was putting in because something to do with the thumb gusset, I don't know. It's all a daze. I have no idea what I was thinking. Honestly, I have no clue. I think there was a different brain in my head at that point because it's like a different person was coming up with all these weird modifications because it makes absolutely no sense to me now. I also realised that if I was going to put a stem there, I needed an extra like 4 stitches beside it for the actual leaves. So I would have had to fudge in a bunch of increases, and you can only fudge in 1 increase every now and again. You can't fudge in 4 increases in one go. So it just wasn't happening, and I made the decision to undo my stem, ladder back down and re-knit it all up as plain knit stitches. So yeah, it was just chaos. It was pure chaos. And in the chaos, I accidentally picked up this 1 stitch as a regular knit stitch, whereas I should have twisted it because it's basically a yarn over or something. I think it was one of the extra increases that I put in. I realized I didn't need, so but like I had all of this extra yarn going up, so I decided to knit it and close it up with a knit 2 together further up at the point where my needle was at that point, which I think was about here. But I should have picked this up through the back loop, or like knitted it through the back loop to close this hole. But I'm just going to go in with scrap yarn and close that. Anyway, my stitch count changed so much at so many different time points. I have no idea what I did. I was taking really meticulous notes on Ravelry for this, but when I got to that point, I honestly can't remember exactly what I did or why I did it. So when I knit the second one, I'm going to actually take note of what I'm doing, because I know what I'm doing with the second one. Obviously, I'm not going to like fudge in extra increases where I don't need them. I'm not going to like ladder down to make a stem and then later realize I don't need that stem and then ladder down and turn it into another stem. So the inside of the thumb gusset, so this is the underside of my hand, I should say. So like that's another reason why I didn't really care, because it's on the inside of my hand and nobody's going to be looking at it too closely. So the inside of the thumb gusset, like there's tension issues because, you know, I had dropped down to pick back up in a twisted stitch, or else drop down my twisted stitches to pick back up regular stitches. And so just, you know, the yarn distribution was a bit messed up. I also ended up accidentally increasing at one of the, where is it? Oh yeah, here. I ended up accidentally increasing here. So this leaf is supposed to be knit as a single stitch. It's made up of 3 stitches and it's supposed to be knit as a single stitch. I accidentally knit all 3 stitches, so I added 2 extra stitches. So my final stitch count at the palm is 63 instead of 60. I don't know. It's just, look, it fits, and that's the main thing. And nobody's going to be counting my stitches to make sure that I have the right amount of stitches. So if this is your first time here, I'm usually a lot more meticulous with my knitting. I just didn't feel like it with these. Like, I love them and they turned out really, really well. So I just don't see the point in getting stressed over a few extra stitches. So that's where I stand with that. So in terms of the thumb gusset length, I mentioned that the pattern has it starting and ending a lot sooner. So according to the pattern, the increases for the thumb gusset stop about here. You can see that I knit quite a significant length. Like that's basically where the thumb gusset is. That's basically where the thumb and the palm are supposed to be split, which would mean that the cuff for me would have to sit, if I like pinch where my thumb and my palm actually separate and I place the increases there, that puts the cuff sitting above my wrist bone. My wrist bone's here. The cuff sits just above it, whereas I knew I wanted it further down on my wrist. So because my increases were going to sit a lot lower on my hand than the pattern intended, I was worried about it being too roomy here, but it's actually fine. Like I can pinch it, and there's about at most a centimeter of positive ease there, but it's actually fine. There's no I thought there would be like bubbling or bulging here, but there's not at all. Like it fits really, really well. So I think that worked out for the best. I'm kind of glad I started those increases when I did. The leaf motif I struggled with at the start because you do a knit, yarn over knit into the same stitch, and then a few rows later you do a cable with that little cluster of stitches, and so you have to cross it over the adjacent stitches, and then you have to knit it through the back loop. And with the cabling and then the knitting through the back loop, I found it really, really, really difficult. First, to get my needle into the cluster of stitches, and second, to pull yarn through the cluster of stitches. So the first time I did this, it probably took me about 15 minutes to do the round. Like, it was really tough. I was getting really frustrated. And she does say in the pattern to do the yarn overs quite loose. So it's absolutely something that I should have done, but I think I just forgot. When I got to the cabling row, I remembered that instruction and I was like, I'm sure it'll be grand. But it was not grand. I nearly, oh my God, I gave myself pins and needles trying to work that round. So the next time I did it, I actually did my yarn overs twice, and even that was quite tough to get my needle through. So the third time I did it, I did my yarn overs 3 times. So I knit, yarn over 3 times, knit into the same stitch, and from then on it was smooth sailing. I found that so much easier. So that's what I'm going to do for the left mitten. I was worried that that would make the leaves look a bit like loose, but it really doesn't. I think they look absolutely fine. So the first row of leaves are done with 1 yarn over, the second are done with 2 yarn overs, and the third onwards are done with 3 yarn overs, and they all look the same. So once I got to the hand, it was obviously quite smooth sailing, just plain stockinette. I did a couple of gradual decreases along the before the main decreases, just to fit my hand a bit better, because I didn't want to have too much room in the fingers. I actually finished the mittens twice and frogged because they were too short. So the first time I started doing my decreases, admittedly earlier than the pattern said to me they looked really, really long, and I tried them on as well. I tried them on all the time, and I thought it was the right time to start decreasing, but it just wasn't. So I finished. They were too short. I frogged to just before the decreases. I added more length until the point that the pattern actually stayed at this time. I followed the pattern and I redid the decreases, and the length was fine then, but they finished with 4 stitches. So you decrease until you had 4 stitches on each needle, and then you graft those 2 sets of 4 stitches together. And I didn't like the pointy look. I wanted mine to look a bit more rounded on the top. Another thing that I learned from my second attempt at closing it off was that I needed to offset my decreases a bit, because I had placed my thumb gusset exactly at the halfway point. So with my 60 stitches or 61 stitches in the round, I started my thumb gusset decreases at 30 stitches. But your thumb doesn't sit directly in line with your hand like this. Like, it sits forward. So that meant that even though I placed my thumb gusset at the halfway point of my mitten, when it's actually on, it's pulling the mitten around a bit to the point where the start of my round is no longer here. It's actually a little bit further back. So if I was placing my decreases at the start of my round and at the halfway point, they were going to be a little bit offset, and that's what they were looking like. They were kind of like there, and then on this side they were like a little bit forward, like this. It's kind of hard to show. So I realized I had to offset my decreases, so I just moved them over by 2 stitches. So when I redid my decreases for the third time, I frogged back to before the decreases. I added 7 rounds. I started decreasing, this time 2 stitches offset. So I started my decreases 2 stitches before both the end of the start of the round and before the middle of the round. And then I decreased until I had 9 stitches on each needle. So as I said, I started with 63 stitches, which meant I was going to end up with an odd number, but that didn't matter. And then I just grafted it together, and then I finally got the shape that I wanted in the top of the mitten. For the thumb, I used DPNs. It was fiddly, but it went very fast, and I can safely say that I don't see full fingered gloves in my future anytime soon. It was just too fiddly. I shifted the DPNs around every round to avoid laddering. So whenever there was like 5 stitches on each DPN, for example, so I knit the 5 stitches onto my empty DPN, and with that DPN I then knit the first stitch of the next DPN so that there were 6 stitches on it, but like that kind of shifted around. That way you don't get any laddering because you don't have the join happening at the same point in every round. It looks a bit narrow, especially when it's not on my hand. And in the last episode I talked about ease in mittens and how I wasn't sure how much ease I needed. I think having made this one now, this one has about, that's where the edge of my hand is. So I would say in total about like 1.5 centimeters of positive ease. And this makes me think that mittens would typically have more than that because it feels fine and I can move my fingers within, but I feel like I should be able to move my fingers more. I'm not too sure because I don't really own mittens and I can't remember the last time I owned mittens. It was a long time ago, but I feel like they should have more ease, but they're still very comfortable. So that's all I have to say about these for now. I do need to get going on the second one. That's literally all I've done, like one round, and I'm hoping I can get the cuff done today. I found the cuff on this one a bit of a slog. I think I was really excited to get to the motif, so now that I've gotten that out of my system, hopefully this one won't feel as tedious. I kept doing that thing where you try it on and you're like, okay, I definitely need at least 8 more rounds, and then I knit one more round and then I tried it on again and I was like shocked Pikachu when it wasn't long enough. I've never used such a large number of patterns for one project. Like, these were inspired by one pattern, I'm using the chart from another, I'm using the base pattern from another. There's just a lot going on, and then it's like semi self-drafted as well, like I'm making my own modifications and changes. So yeah, it's been fun. I haven't had to frog as much as I thought I would, but at the same time I will admit that there's been times when I probably should have frogged and I didn't, and I just fudged it, which is not the best approach, I know. I will block them just to even out the stitches, and especially around the thumb. I feel like around the thumb decreases, they just look a bit janky, so I don't expect this to change too much with blocking because it's quite a sticky yarn, obviously being mohair based. So, but yeah, I just think blocking will be nice to even out the stitches a bit. Some people told me in the comments of the last video that they will stretch a lot with wear, so that's probably a good thing too, because as I said, they've got like just a tiny bit of positive ease at the moment, so it might be nice if they stretch out a little bit more. But if they don't, I am still over the moon with these. This is exactly how I wanted these mittens to look when I first thought about them back when I got the yarn, so I am just so pleased that I've been able to make them turn out the way I want them to. My last whip is my Levitate Wrap, and I actually don't have too much to say about this, but I have reached a bit of a milestone in the pattern in that I have finished the body, so I thought we would try it on today. This is a pattern by My Favourite Things Knitwear, and it's a wrap cardigan that I'm knitting with softest alpaca from Mode at Rowan, which was gifted to me. I'm knitting this on 4.5mm needles, although the pattern calls for 6mm, and the gauge is 15 stitches and 10 centimeters. I saw a comment recently where someone said, I think it was on Reddit, someone said they prefer to see the gauge of a pattern rather than the needle size, which kind of makes sense because everyone's tension is different. So I'm going to try and remember to say the gauge of patterns from now on. So this one is 15 stitches per 10 centimeters. So as I said, I'm now finished the body, so I figured I would try it on and show you the length. I'll put in some B-roll footage. The pattern actually says that at this point it's supposed to be 44 centimeters measured from the back neck. Mine is only measuring 34 centimeters, which is a pretty significant difference, but I want this to be cropped, and at the moment I also need to add the band along the bottom, which will add about 1.5 inches. I'm sorry, I'm switching between centimeters and inches, but I think that's about 3.5 centimeters or something. So yeah, I debated adding a couple of rows at the bottom, but I'm not going to in case it grows, because I think if it grows and I've added more length, it'll be too long. So I'm quite happy to keep it at the length it's at the moment. The thing is, this will be impossible to adjust the length when it's done because of all the different double knit edges you add. So if I wanted to adjust the length, I would have to undo everything that I do from this point onwards, except for the sleeves, which is not something I see myself doing. So I'm going to keep it as is and just hope for the best. The next step is to pick up along the front edge to work the double knit band, and I'm actually kind of looking forward to that. I think my Rivendell cardigan taught me that I kind of like working double knit bands. For that one I went down a full millimeter in size, so I'm going to do the same for this, which means going down to a 3.5mm needle, which seems quite small for this yarn, but that's what I had to do for the Rivendell cardigan too, so I think it will be fine. And I'm hoping to have those stitches picked up before my flight to Paris so that I can actually work on that band on the plane. And this is going to be the only project I bring with me to Paris, so I can hopefully get a good chunk of progress done on it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That is all I'm going to talk about in terms of my projects today. I have made progress on my Mackenzie scarf, but I figured the next time I talk about it will be after I finish the 4th stripe and have maybe blocked it at that point. And I also have to fix the length of my ranunculus, and more recently the Carla cardigan that I gifted my mum. She wants the cuffs to be a little bit tighter, and you know what, I should have known that. I've said before that she's very practical, and you know, cuffs that hang down to like here are not very practical. She specifically told me that she's worried about when she eats soup, the cuffs will the cuffs will get into the soup, and I'll be damned if I'm going to get between her and her soup, so I'm going to fix the cuff for her. She didn't want to give me any more work to do, so she literally asked me if I could put a stitch in the cuff, and let's see if I can. I don't have the cardigan with me, but let's just pretend that my Rivendell cardigan is the cardigan. She kind of folded over the fabric like this, and then asked me if I could put a stitch in it. And I was like, that would look awful. I'm not going to let you walk around like that. What kind of daughter would I be if I let you walk around with your cuff looking like that? I can't do that. That looks awful. So I have to do that, which means ripping back the ribbing, fine. Ripping back the last 12 rows, I guess. I'll put a picture of it up here in case you haven't seen it. But basically the sleeve is knit straight down with no decreases. There is a mosaic knit pattern going down. I suppose you could have decreases, but it would mess up the motif. So there are no decreases. And I will have to basically put decreases in the last main colour section. So like those last 12 rows before the ribbing, I'll have to put decreases in there. And I'm not sure whether I should space out decreases evenly throughout the 12 rounds, or if I should just kind of do rapid decreases in the last few rounds to make a very kind of bubbly cuff. Do you know what I mean? So if you have any thoughts on that, please leave them down below. I'm just not too sure what the best way to approach it is. I would actually like to get that done this week, and then my ranunculus will be after that. So I've got a few projects to fix. Celeste was the priority, and next will be the Carla cardigan, and next will be the ranunculus, and then I can start focusing on active whips again. So I do have one small acquisition. It's not the most exciting, but it's exciting for me because it's a yarn that I've never worked with before and it's really popular. And that is Rosa Pomar Mondim. And I got some very boring colours, just black and cream. I was kind of hoping for a white, and I couldn't see a white. I did see this undyed, and I also saw a very, very, very pale grey that almost looked white, but I was kind of nervous to get it in case it arrived and it was actually grey, because I did want white, and cream is better than grey. I also think in contrast with each other, and without the ball bands, because the ball band is obviously white and it's making the cream look really cream. When it's just the black and white knit up together, I think that will look fine. I have a really exciting plan for these that I just don't want to share too much about yet, but it's going to be a pair of socks, and it's a pattern that I've knit before, but I'm making some changes to it, and I'm really excited. Yeah, these are the second pair of socks in my queue, so I have one other pair of socks to knit, and then I'll get onto these. So stay tuned. I'm really excited to show you what I'm doing with these. So that is everything for today, and I really enjoyed sitting down and chatting about these projects today, and I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions about anything that I showed today, please do leave a comment below. I will always reply to your comments and your questions. And of course, if you want to see more from this channel, don't forget to subscribe. It really means a lot, especially over the last few weeks. I've gained a lot of new subscribers, so I'm really grateful for everyone who's joined, and I hope you continue to enjoy watching my videos. So until the next time, happy knitting. Bye.